Hello, I am Ed Pegg Jr., and welcome to episode 27 of Mathematical Games, a series honoring Martin Gardner's mathematical game series for Scientific American. Martin Gardner wrote mathematical games in Scientific American for 25 years and published 15 books about them, and they were a continuing inspiration for mathematics of all sorts, but especially recreational mathematics. Usually, when something new came out in math that could be interesting to to many people, mathematicians would write to Martin and say, "Here's something neat. You should talk about it." And one of the things that Martin Gardner popularized was John Conway's Game of Life, which is what we'll be talking about today. As usual, I talk about demonstrations, which is up and running again. There's many different demonstrations about the Game of Life and related items in the demonstration site. All of them free. You can just download them and try them out. And I'll be putting a new one there soon for some of the things that I cover in this talk. So, what is the Game of Life? Here's one of Martin Gardner's first columns about it. And the rules are simple. You have a grid, a square grid of living and dead cells, or living cells and empty cells. And the living cells survive if they touch two or three other living cells. Otherwise, the cells die if they're crowded or if there's not enough other cells around them. Empty spaces will birth a new cell if they touch exactly three living cells. And he goes into detail on the rules for the Game of Life here. And he gives some examples for what happens in, say, the starting condition of uh, I pentomino 7, you get this pattern. And if you run the R pentomino, you get this pattern with gliders. So if you're not familiar with the Game of Life, it basically acts like this when it runs. And we can slow this down some. Um, as the as the cells are evolving each step, you get this different behavior. So you get these things like the blinker, chaos, and you get these various still lifes like the block um, and traffic signals. And of course, you get gliders moving off after a while. So that's an example of the Game of Life in action with, and this is the program Golly, which is free. So Martin talked about the various still lifes you could get. For example, the fish hook is also known as the eater because it's very good at controlling chaos. You can also get oscillators such as these. And may as well bring this over here. Oops. I think they have a big oscillator collection here. For example, here's a whole bunch of different oscillators. So another thing that he mentioned in the early columns were Methuselahs, ones that lasted for a long time. For example, this shape will become the R pentomino in a few steps. There's also things like the B heptamino here. Uh, these various patterns that created a lot of chaos before they died. And he also talks about the eater here about to eat various things. And if you get this two glider collision, it will produce an eater. So this is a good shape for controlling gliders. And we have a demonstration which has many um, game of life configurations, for example, the Gosper glider gun here, but also various things such as this shape here, which produces over on here this big spark, which is useful for various constructions in the game of life. So what is a signal in the game of life? One example is you can have the R pentomino here, and as it moves, it makes copies of itself every 18 steps, such as that, as it eats down a row of blinkers. Unfortunately, as it's walking away from the explosion is just getting bigger and bigger behind it, and eventually it's wiped out after 5 steps forward. So it's not quite a good signal because it dies out. But there's also many other signals that don't end up dying. But we may as well talk about this first big experiment in the game of life done on Go boards. They have this shape here, and they wanted to know what it did. So after 80 steps, you get to this position, and that's where the first glider came out. Richard K. Guy noticed this shape was walking away. And slightly earlier than that, they noticed this odd shape here. The R pentomino started over here, and after a number of steps, 48 steps, they had this odd shape here, which they called the Herschel. And various other shapes which they'd seen before in other iterations, but they were close together, so they wound up created more chaos. So in this first experiment, the R pentomino was noticed. They also noticed this shape was one that came up a lot, and the Herschel shape was another shape that they saw come up a lot, usually isolated, and they noticed the glider. Much later in the evolution of the R pentomino, at step 785, they noticed this shape down here called the queen bee. And what it did is slightly oscillated back and forth before destroying itself. So Martin Gardner wrote his column, and that generated a lot of interest, and suddenly there were many people looking at the game of life. And John Quartermain decided to look at all pentominoes, hexominoes, and other polyominoes, just to see what they did. He wrote a computer program on an early system to do that. And he was looking for shapes which would replicate themselves. And this is one shape that he found here. And after 48 steps, if you run this shape, you get the shape again, offset with some chaos behind it. And after another 48 steps, it appears again, and so on. And this continues on for 24 steps before the explosion wipes out what's happening. And this eventually settles down to a stable pattern after about 3,000 steps. But this was called the switch engine. People wondered if anything could be done with this shape to resolve all the chaos. And eventually, 26 years later, they started looking for these things called signals, where you have a shape which can be moved somewhere else to either replicate itself or replicate one of these other shapes. So these are the important signals here, and one characteristic is that they will easily reproduce either themselves or others, and it doesn't take much to get them to move somewhere else. The gliders and small shapeships, of course, are automatically moved somewhere else, but often you want to move things in a different direction. So one of the first items was seen in the evolution of the Arpentomino was this shape. Also, this one block here can be moved up a space. And after 20 steps, you get a block here and a Herschel over here. So the B heptamino to Herschel is a very easy signal to set up because it pretty much happens automatically. Another easy evolution is to start with the Herschel, and if you have a block or a beehive over here, after 75 steps, you get the beehive is still over here, and you've got a glider moving down. So that's an example of a simple signal. You've got a single Herschel object and a beehive, and you get this reaction. So here's one of the first conduits. You have a B and pentomino over here, and this is what's called a ghost Herschel. It'll eventually be a Herschel over here with one extra block. This is a good way of indicating where a signal is going to wind up. So as we run it, we get this chaos for a while. But then after 59 steps, we have the Herschel over here, and we've got the block back where it was. So we want this shape to send a signal over to here. One way to do it is to have a block and a snake, and after 59 steps, we get a movement of one shape to the other place. So this is one of the first, what were known as conduits, developed by David Buckingham. So two of the major signals are gliders and lightweight spaceships. So here's an example of gliders here. And after a bit of chaos, they turn into lightweight spaceships, which then crash into each other to produce gliders, starting the whole process again. So this is a oscillator based on spaceships and gliders. So if you have a good mechanism for converting one signal to another, you can use that to build an oscillator, as was done here. And this shape here will convert, or these two shapes will convert two gliders into two lightweight spaceships. And I mentioned back here, this was a alphabet. When any signal is important enough, it will be assigned a letter of the alphabet. And so far, there are 16 recognized signals in the game of life with these letters. This is the alphabet of signals in the game of life. So the M is the middleweight spaceship. So we have spaceships coming in to this object of still lifes, and they convert the spaceships into gliders before recovering. So that's an example of an important signal with a M to G converter. We mentioned the B pentomino, heptamino. So at generation 20, we get the Herschel, and then it continues to produce chaos from there with a glider after 40 steps. So here's an example of another converter. We have a still life down here, and this will convert to an R after some number of steps. As we move along, we get the R. So this moves a B heptamino to an R in 20 steps. We can also convert a B heptamino to a glider. So we initially start with a block here in this shape, and after some number of steps, the block is back where it was, and we've sent off a glider. So if you have the right series of circuits in a row, this is what's known as a circuit. You can take a shape and move it to another signal somewhere else with a known offset. So all you need to do is know these pieces, and you can start building circuitry out of these shapes. H is for Herschel. So here's how it evolves. It takes a while to it's one of the Methuselahs, so it takes a while to fully resolve. But usually for any of these signals, it's usually the first 50 or so steps that are important. Here's a important object known as the syringe. So you've got a glider coming in, and it's going to produce a Herschel over here. This is a ghost Herschel at the moment, but it'll be a full Herschel once this is finished running. So it comes into this still life object. There's some chaos for a while. And then after a while, you have a Herschel shape over here after 165 steps. So the glider comes in, chaos, and you have the signal redone. One of the important things you need for any of these signal objects is that they have to be easy to create, and they have to be controllable, and they have to have movement. I mentioned the switch engine earlier. It's officially not a signal yet because it's a very dirty object. It's hard to control what it does. So it's not classified as a signal yet. So far, they've only been able to figure out ways of making it interact with itself, but not to create other signals. So it's sort of a separate item in the world of game of life signals. So here's another reaction. We have a Herschel here, and this is a set of still lifes, which will eventually create a Herschel over here. So we run it for a while, we get chaos, but then the chaos resolves to a Herschel here, and we also have a glider that's come off. Another important signal is the pi heptamino, which has a nice symmetrical bit of chaos. And all of these shapes here are equivalent to the pi signal. So with any of these signals, they have an evolution, and there's also usually other branches that can get into the same evolution. So when we have a particular signal that we've mentioned, often it can be hundreds of different shapes representing that signal. So here's some of the shapes that are equivalent to the pi signal. Q is for queen bee. I mentioned this shape here. So it has one of the early interscene evolutions. After a number of steps, it's recreated itself and left a beehive behind. As it continues evolving, it creates another beehive and turns around again, but then it bumps into the previous beehive, and from there on, it's just chaos again. So this was noticed in the evolution of the R pentomino, that you have this shape which will create a copy of itself and make a block. So the question was, is there anything that can be done with that? And the shape that was noticed by Bill Gosper was the Gosper glider gun, which I should have put right here. We've mentioned the R pentomino, and that creates a B heptamino at step 20, and a Herschel at step 48. All of these shapes here are equivalent to the R pentomino. For example, Stephen Wolfram just wrote a blog article, and one of the first things he talks about is the evolution of the R pentomino, but he has it start right now with this shape instead of this shape. But this shape is equivalent to the R pentomino, as are all of these other shapes. So this oscillator here is an example of using R's in an oscillator, and after 24 steps, you get the R's back. This is what's known as a Hassler. You've got the same shape, and you basically contain it, and it does various things before it returns to its original shape. That's a type of oscillator known as a Hassler. C is for century. Here's how this shape starts its evolution. And it's a driver for this glider gun here. This object here is equivalent to the century. D is for dove, which evolves in this way. And here's an example of a dove shape becoming a glider. E is for E heptamino, which evolves like so. And here is a sample evolution for it. This is equivalent to the E heptamino. We get a order 412 oscillator. I is for I heptamino, which evolves like so. And here's a signal for converting a B to an I after 91 steps. This shape being equivalent to the I. And we start with a set of blocks and still lifes. And when the reaction is done, we have the same shapes left. There's just a few more signals left. J is for Blancai, which evolves as so. And here's a J to H converter. This is equivalent to the J. And after 64 steps, we get a Herschel over here. So in the game of life, they started looking for these reactions. How can we get one shape to be created from another shape just by having simple still lifes and other objects on the screen? One other signal that became important is this shape here, the two glider octomino, which has a chaotic evolution. They noticed that this shape will move by itself on a torus, an 11 by 11 torus. You've got this shape here, and if you just keep it within the 11 by 11 torus, it recreates itself and is basically a glider on the 11 by 11 torus with a speed of 1/39. And the last of the objects in the alphabet, or actually no, the second last is U-turner, this shape here, which evolves. And here's a U to a B. After some number of steps, we get the B heptamino. And the last is the wing, which evolves. And all of these signals have many different conversions, but they're also used for linking circuits together. For example, here is a Herschel here, Herschel glider, Herschel glider. This is an oscillator here with a period of 117. However, this oscillator can be stretched. If we move these shapes here diagonally this way, we can increase the period of this oscillator by 1. And we can also move these closer together. As seen, so here's the signals. Here's a manipulate, which will allow you to do any period over 78. So here's what it looks like after some number of steps. What's happening is and this is a lot going on here. This is a glider gun, which is adjustable. It can make any glider gun of period 78 or higher. But what it's doing is, after you've stretched the still lifes apart, you have to load it up with glider guns, which uses this shape here to convert gliders to Herschels. The Herschels will move around the track. This part of the circuitry over here will convert a Herschel back into a glider, which shoots it down into another syringe down here. So you basically start getting a loop of Herschels and gliders in this area over here after you've loaded it up with 8 gliders. So once it's been set up, and it takes a while to build all this on the fly, you get the glider gun with the given period. Here it's 90. And here it is after it's been done running. Oops, it didn't work. Let's try that again. And it doesn't want to run now. Let me see if I can find the code for this. Well, it looks like I have a failure there, but this is an adjustable oscillator or an adjustable glider gun, and I'll have a set of code for this in a demonstration sometime in the near future. With the ability to make adjustable oscillators, they eventually came to the realization that they could make any oscillator with a period over 60, by using these circuits. So basically, the only oscillators they didn't know about were the ones that had a period of less than 60, and that was something that was realized in 1996. And so the search was on for oscillators that had the missing periods. And in the year 2023, there's only two periods left, 19 and 41. So both of those were discovered. Here's a 19 here. This is a period 19 oscillator. And it uses familiar shapes here. They started figuring out various still lifes, which were very good in making constructions. And the other one that wasn't known was period 41, which is this here. And this is also using various types of circuits to create an oscillator. But they needed to figure out some of these other circuits first before they could polish off this last period. So we can look at other periods, and we've got oscillators for every period in this demonstration. So here's a still life, a simple period 2 oscillator, a period 3 oscillator, which is has a highly chaotic shape, period 4 oscillator, a barber pole, and so on. So in 2023, they proved that life is omniperiodic, which means there's oscillators for all periods. And part of the proof is the circuits that I mentioned earlier. You can set up a series of circuits to any period of 60 or greater. And I showed you the adjustable circuit that can produce any oscillator of period 78 or higher. So there's a large collection of conduits, and I can show some of these in Golly. Let me see this here. So here's various oscillators, and I should be able to open up conduits. So here's a whole bunch of conduits here. And it's a large collection. So usually whenever they're trying to build something in the game of life, this is one of the things that they will look at, is the signals that they have available, and also this collection here of sparkers. Basically, you want to get a dot or a domino somewhere within a given oscillation period. So with these, if you want, say, a period 3 oscillator, and you want a handy dot somewhere that has a little bit of clearance, you'd want to use a strong edge dot. And if you wanted something else like a domino shape or a pair of dots at a separation, these are oscillators that can produce those particular dots at a particular location. So these sparkers are used as part of constructions in the game of life. There's many other oscillators that don't have anything chaotic on the outer edge, and those are somewhat useless for constructions because all of the chaos is internal, so they're basically not useful. So here's a grid of the sparkers. This is a Both of these are available at the Life Wiki site, and I showed some of these magnifications of what's in the grid. For example, this particular circuit here will take a Herschel here and move it to this location. And there's about 1,000 of these circuits known. And I showed the sparker just now. Here's some of these sparkers of smaller period. And as I mentioned at the start, Stephen Wolfram recently wrote about the game of life. He was interested in talking about how the evolution of game of life and the different tools that they came up with were able to help with building objects, larger objects within the game of life. And shortly after he finalized content on Monday, this period 14 glider gun was found. He mentions in the article that the longest known true period glider gun has period 15. And right after he finished the whole thing, was ready to publish, they found a period 14 glider gun. So there's still a lot of very active research within the game of life. This was just found earlier this week. He mentions the current state of the art for gliders. These are the different periods and speeds known for gliders, and we have the smallest known case for each here. These are all many of these were just found within the last decade. And I believe in Golly there is a spaceship collection. Let me see if I can find that. Right. Here's a collection of spaceships of various speeds and periods. You can see the slowest ones are at the bottom. The switch engine was mentioned earlier. For 30 years, they tried to make different spaceships out of it with a different number of switch engines. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that they figured out how to make a spaceship out of just 2 switch engines, which was proved impossible several times until it was found that actually you could make a spaceship out of switch engines, just 2 switch engines. So you can see that you've got this configuration of blocks slowly moving along with a bunch of chaos. Another item of interest is glider guns. Usually if you have a oscillator with chaos, it's possible to add a sparker to produce a glider gun. So in Stephen's article, he mentions all the glider guns of all various periods, but since one was just found last Sunday, his article doesn't have the period 14 glider gun. But there's a wide variety of these different glider guns with different periods. The first one being the Gosper glider gun up here, and 2 variations were able to do periods 60 and 46, but it wasn't until 26 years later that a period 24 glider gun was found. And from there, many other glider guns were found using this, much of this using this concept of signals to drive various reactions within a certain period. One other thing that can be done within the game of life is to find long-lived objects that eventually vanish. So here's an example of one. And after about 100 steps, there's nothing. Everything is gone. So this is what's called a diehard. It does a whole bunch of work, but then it vanishes. It just completely dies. There's nothing left. So people wondered what else you could do with that. One thing to note is that if you have, say, just a spaceship and a block, if they're set far apart, eventually the spaceship will crash into the block and die. So it's easy to set up a diehard that lasts a long time, but it's difficult to set one up that lasts a long time with a given bounding box. So here's an example of a bounded object that completely dies off in 30,000 steps. I don't have all 30,000 steps here, but the idea is you have these different spaceships of different periods, and you've basically set up something so that eventually a faster spaceship is sent out here to go and kill this one, and eventually these other spaceships will crash into it and produce a reaction that sends back a spaceship which destroys everything that's left. So once that was done, they started to construct these bounded shapes which would last a long time. And the question was, how long of a period could you set up? Well, it turns out it's a ridiculously long time. This particular shape here, here's a start for what it's doing, will last 17 tetrated 3 times to the third. You need a Knuth notation here to just express how large this number is. So to start off with, you calculate 17 to the power of itself 17 times. You take that number, you do 17 to the power of itself that many times, which is already an absurdly large number, bigger than all the particles. Well, we're starting with a number bigger than all the particles of the universe, and then we're using that as an index for tetration. And you take that number to make another series of power. So this is the largest number I've ever had to deal with in my life, other than infinity. I didn't know I would ever encounter something that used such a small or such a huge number. And it takes that number of steps for this one to completely die out. There's a proof that it does eventually die. So here's how it starts. And of course, I can't run all of it because I would need all of the universe, trillions and trillions and trillions. Well, it's impossible to express just how large that number is, but you can prove that this eventually, everything in this object eventually is dead. Golly is something I've shown here. You can get it for free. This whole talk will be online at community.wolfram.com sometime later today, and you'll be able to get all the links and things from there. But I may as well put this link into over here. So Golly is where you can get this free program that has a lot of material, and you can run life and other cellular automata on it. And it includes things like all these circuits. There's also an excellent book that covers the history of Game of Life up until about 2 years ago. This is also a free book. We also have various demonstrations that have other variations of cellular automata, other 2D cellular automata. So the Game of Life is survive on 2, 3, birth on 3, and as we run it. We can run it, and we get typical game of life material or typical behavior. But we can also change the role, and we get different behaviors. I believe with Survive on 6, you get High Life, which is a different behavior. And we can also do things like stains. And these are objects that will typically grow in strange way to make what looks like ink blots. Let's see. Seeds is another. There's a lot of named cellular automata for ones that have unusual behavior. If the number of states is changed, a game of life is basically just one state. If the number of generations is different, for example, if a cell can take say two cycles to die instead of just one, or 3 cycles, you can get other behavior, what's called generation cellular automata. And there's a number of different named named automata based on these generation rules. And this is another Wolfram demonstration. One other concept that isn't as well understood is the concept of fuses. So here's some various fuses here. Here we have a object eating a bunch of blinkers. Here's another set of blinkers which has a different speed of fuse. This is a wing, I think, eating a row of blinkers. Excuse me. Here we have a beehive eating rows of blocks, and if they're spaced differently, they can also be eaten. And that leads up to my first unsolved question. There's a lot of research done on whether fuses can be bent, and so far they haven't found good examples of bending fuses. I've shown a lot of oscillators, are a lot of conduits, and an open question is for that grid I showed earlier, are there other, is it possible to fill in? Let me show that grid again. Go back here. Oops, it's here. So here we have this grid of circuits converting to other circuits. For example, is there a B to E circuit, or a glider to M, or Q to L? There's a bunch of things in this grid that are unfilled. So if it's possible to fill any of those would be interesting advances within signal circuitry. I mentioned the glider gun true periods. Up until last week, this number was red, and now there are these periods that are unknown for making true period glider guns. It's quite possible that some of these could be filled in by using some of the signals and sparkers that I've mentioned today. It's just a matter of putting them together right. Glider reflectors are another thing that has a few unknown items. I imagine I could use the new glider gun to produce a new glider reflector with a true period 14. It just hasn't been done yet. And there's these red items here are various spaceships that are unknown yet. The first of these 2-1 items, that was the Sir Robin spaceship, which was found a few years ago. And that's one of the things in the spaceship table, which I'll be glad to show here. Let me see if I can find that. It's one of these here. Yeah, this one here. This is the first spaceship that was found that has a night move in it. So it's basically not moving diagonally. It's not moving horizontally or vertically. It's moving like a knight. And this was the first one that was found in 2018. So these are some of the unsolved questions, and that's what I had prepared. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that people have. I could also go back and go over some things. Let's see. How many steps does it take to make itself leap into 3D space? I haven't looked too much at 3D game of life-like objects. I know there's many of them, but so far as I know, there isn't a particular rule set that has become most popular yet. But I know there's plenty of 3D cellular automatas that have glider-like behavior. But so far as I know, they haven't started building up things like these circuits in those worlds. One of the best 2D cellular automata for easily making things is what's called Wire World. And I can show that real quick with the. So here's an example that was originally shown at my site Math Puzzle years ago. You have a multiplier here. You basically set up any number you want here in these bits, and you set up any number you want here with these bits, and this will multiply those two numbers together after a few thousand steps. You'll get the answer up here as for what those two numbers multiply out to be, because there's a bunch of circuitry in here that can calculate multiplications. So this is almost done. The numbers, two numbers multiplied together in binary equal this number up here. It's possible to do the same things in the game of life, but so far, nothing quite resembling Wire World's simplicity has been found yet. So many thanks for attending my talk. That's it for now.